Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us. Yes, you, the lifelong learner who is, always hunting for that perfect aha
Though
moment.
who probably doesn't have the time to wade through mountains of information overload.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So today, our mission is to guide you through a truly fascinating philosophical text. We're looking at chapter 10 of a book called Thus Spoke Confucius.
Yeah, written by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily. And this specific chapter is titled Genius and Brilliance.
And it's not just like a casual observation. I mean, it is a remarkable piece of writing.
It really is. Al-Waily provides this rigorous, almost structural teardown of the human mind. He looks at how it creates and that terrifyingly thin line between absolute brilliance and total madness.
Which is wild. So we're going to unpack the actual functional difference between being brilliant and being a genius.
Right, because they are not the same thing in his eyes.
Not at all. We'll explore why true creators almost always have to embrace what, looks to the rest of the world like insanity.
And we'll look at the rather dark historical truth of how society usually, well, tortures its greatest minds before it ever decides to celebrate them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand how to cultivate a great mind, we first have to agree on what greatness actually looks like, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Al-Waili draws a very hard, very distinct line between genius, which in the Arabic text is al-abqariya, and brilliance, which is al-nubu.
And this distinction, it's basically the absolute foundation of his entire philosophy here.
It is. So he defines genius as the creation of universals. In Arabic, al-kuliyat.
Universals, like completely unprecedented concepts.
Right. A universal is something that just, it didn't exist before that mind willed it into being. It's a foundational framework.
He gives some incredible historical examples of this, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Things like Plato's theory of forms, Newton's discovery of gravity, Darwin's theory of evolution, Einstein's relativity.
And he also mentions physical inventions, too, like the phonograph or the telephone.
Yeah, world-shifting creations that simply did not exist in the public consciousness before someone just, reached into the void and pulled them out.
He even scales this back to the dawn of humanity, which I thought was fascinating.
The needle example, right?
Yes. The person who invented the very first needle was a genius. Because without that universal concept of piercing and threading, humanity would have just remained wearing loose animal hides.
There was no stepping stone to the needle. I mean, it was a pure conceptual leap. The first person to bake bread, the first person to conceptualize written letters, these are all creations of universals.
Okay, so that's genius. But what about brilliance then?
So brilliance, on the other hand, is the creation of particulars, or al-juz'iyat.
So if I'm understanding the mechanism here, brilliance is expanding on a universal that a genius already brought into existence.
That's exactly it. A brilliant mind takes a massive foundational theory like, say, Darwin's evolution, and they expand it.
They discover new facts, categorize new species, that sort of thing.
Right. They push the boundaries of the theory in ways that even Darwin himself probably never imagined. But, and this is key, they are still operating within the safe, established framework that the original genius provided.
It sounds like genius is inventing the very concept of a house, while brilliance is being the architect who comes along centuries later and designs an incredible, ultra-modern, energy-efficient new wing for that house.
Oh, that is a perfect way to visualize it. The architect is undeniably brilliant, but, they still needed the abstract concept of a house to exist first.
But I have to push back here for a second.
Yeah.
Isn't brilliance just as difficult?
In what way?
I mean, mathematically proving a new facet of relativity or designing a complex modern structure that requires an immense amount of intellect. Why does Al-Waily elevate genius so much higher on the pedestal?
That's a really common way to look at it, and it's where Al-Waily makes a crucial distinction about the internal mechanics of the mind.
Okay, tell me more about that.
He argues that genius requires this incredibly rare combination of vast, boundless imagination paired with a fiercely penetrating will. He uses the example of the sculptor Michelangelo.
Oh, I love this example.
Yeah, when Michelangelo approached a block of marble, he wasn't just, chiseling away and hoping for the best. He saw the exact, completed reality of the statue in his imagination first.
It existed fully formed in his mind before he ever even touched a tool.
Right. What's fascinating here is that without that blueprint, the will is just swinging a hammer in the dark.
So the imagination is the blueprint, and the will is the construction crew that forces the physical world to match that blueprint.
Exactly. And Al-Waily points out that academic study and formal education are actually secondary to this process.
Wait, really? secondary?
Yeah, I mean, you can have a genius who has zero formal schooling simply because they possess that raw, innate combination of imagination and will, but you cannot have a genius who lacks that innate talent no matter how many degrees they hold.
So brilliance can be trained through rigorous schooling, but genius must be born and then cultivated.
Yes, precisely.
Well, now that we know what a genius produces, these massive, unprecedented universals, we have to look at the massive obstacles standing in their way.
And there are many.
Because apparently, carrying a universal idea around in your head is a highly dangerous thing to do.
It is incredibly dangerous. Al-Waily frames this by first establishing the immense value of these ideas. He argues that sound, universal ideas are a form of wealth that is vastly superior to material wealth.
He is very blunt about it, actually.
Yeah, stating that material wealth without intellect or high morals guiding it is like a weapon in the hands of a madman.
An absolute idiot can inherit a fortune, but only a truly brilliant mind can generate great ideas. The true currency of human progress isn't gold, it's the crystallized thought of these rare minds.
And think about how this applies to you, the listener, in your own life. Think about how often you or I have a slightly out-of-the-box idea at work.
Oh, all the time. And we immediately water it down because we're afraid the boss will think it's weird.
Right. Al-Waily is saying that instinct, the fear of criticism, is the ultimate killer of genius. When a creator has a completely unprecedented idea, the masses, who are, comfortable in their existing frameworks, will inevitably reject it.
Because it's too new, it breaks their reality.
Exactly. And if the creator fears that rejection, it paralyzes their mind. It forces them to lower their visionary ideas down to the palatable level of the general public.
And the moment you compromise a universal to make it popular, you just destroy its transformative power.
Which brings up his point about failure. He heavily champions deliberate failure over accidental success.
Like the Thomas Edison example.
Right. Edison failed over 700 times while trying to invent the practical light bulb. But think about the psychology of failing almost 1,000 times. How does a mind endure that?
I mean, I would give up after 4 or 5 tries.
Most people would. But the psychology is rooted in that initial imagination we discussed. At failure number 400, Edison wasn't doubting the universal concept of the light bulb.
He knew the blueprint in his mind was flawless. The physical materials were simply being stubborn.
Exactly. Al-Waily says that persistent, deliberate search, even through hundreds of agonies and failures, is the true essence of creativity.
And he contrasts that deliberate search with a clerk who apparently invented blotting paper by, accidentally mixing the wrong materials together in a factory.
Right, and Al-Waily states that accidental success contains absolutely zero true creativity.
Wait, so accidental success doesn't count at all?
Not to Al-Waily. The clerk didn't have a vision, he just made a mistake that happened to be useful. Edison had a vision, and his failures were just required steps on the path to realizing it.
That distinction between intent and accident is really vital. But returning to your point about the fear of criticism, Al-Waily doesn't sugarcoat the stakes, does he?
No, he is painfully aware that society doesn't just criticize geniuses, it actively destroys them. Yeah. Ignorant majorities routinely oppress visionaries, sometimes subjecting them to horrific torture, exile, or execution, only for society to wake up centuries later and deeply regret it.
It's the classic, we burned you at the stake, but now we're going to build a statue of you dynamic.
It's a tale as old as time.
So how does Al-Waily reconcile this demand for absolute courage with the harsh reality of societal backlash?
Well, he argues that true creators, whether they are prophets, reformers, or great thinkers, must expect this hostility. It is literally the cost of carrying a universal.
He references some great historical and religious figures to make this point, right?
Yes, he mentions the Prophet Muhammad, who faced immense persecution for bringing a new universal framework to his society, and Al-Hussein bin Ali, who stood up against overwhelming oppression because he refused to compromise on a fundamental truth.
They didn't back down just because the masses disagreed or threatened them.
Exactly. And he also brings in a really interesting Islamic concept to frame the value of the attempt itself.
Oh, right, the judge example.
Yeah, he references the idea that a judge who strives earnestly to find the truth and gets it right receives 2 rewards.
Okay.
But a judge who strives just as earnestly, puts in the full intellectual effort, and gets it wrong, still receives 1 reward.
The underlying philosophy being that the sincere, grueling pursuit of truth is inherently sacred, regardless of the immediate outcome. The effort of the genius is validated by the attempt itself.
Precisely. It's a beautiful way to look at intellectual struggle.
That's incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
But it sets up a powerful causality.
Yeah.
If the outside world is this hostile, this dangerous, and this violently resistant to new ideas, the genius has to retreat.
They do. They have to go somewhere safe to find these world-changing universals. And this is where Al-Waily takes us on a deep dive inward.
To explain this inward retreat, Al-Waily categorizes humanity into two broad psychological profiles, right? The realists and the subjectivists.
Yes, realists are focused entirely on the external material world. They deal with what is tangible, measurable, and currently accepted by society.
And subjectivists.
Subjectivists are focused on the inner self, the world of ideas, imagination, and abstract thought.
So what is the actual mechanism of how a subjectivist views the world differently? Like day to day?
Al-Waily argues that subjectivists actually know everything the realists know about the external world. Plus, they have access to an entire inner universe of connections that the realists simply can't see.
I need an analogy for this.
Okay, think of it with a modern example. A realist looks at a smartphone and sees glass, metal, and a tool for sending emails.
Right.
A subjectivist looks at that same phone and sees the glass and metal, but they also see a node in a global hive mind that is fundamentally altering human dopamine receptors and shifting the course of sociological evolution.
Oh, wow. But because the realist's vision is limited strictly to the glass and metal, when the subjectivist tries to describe the shifting of human sociology, the realist thinks they are just hallucinating.
This is exactly why realists so frequently accuse subjectivists of madness, heresy, or deviance. They simply cannot perceive the second layer of reality that the genius is synthesizing.
So, to protect themselves and their ideas, the genius engages in what Al-Waily calls thinking solitude, or al-wada al-mufakira.
Yes, great minds require profound isolation. Al-Waily gives some really vivid examples. Edison physically locking himself in a room for days to think.
The Prophet Muhammad retreating to the absolute isolation of the cave of Hira to reflect before receiving revelation.
He even describes the philosopher Socrates standing completely still in one spot, lost in thought, for an entire night, not moving a single muscle until the heat of the morning sun finally woke him from his trance.
I mean, look at the mechanism of what Socrates was doing there. Why stand completely still for an entire night?
Because any physical movement, any sensory input like a conversation, a changing landscape, even the feeling of walking, requires cognitive load.
Right. It interrupts the delicate, incredibly complex synthesis of the universal happening in his mind.
Exactly.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this glorification of total isolation.
Go for it.
What if I'm the kind of person who does my best thinking in a crowded, noisy coffee shop? Or when I'm bouncing ideas off a collaborative team in a boardroom? Is my thinking invalid?
That's the exact trap people fall into when reading this. It sounds like he's just glorifying introverts or justifying social anxiety, but what he actually means by thinking solitude is what he calls spiritual exercise.
Spiritual exercise,
Yeah.
like going to the gym for your mind.
Exactly. Think about physical exercise. If you want to build muscle, you have to subject your body to intense, focused strain. Al-Waily argues that deep, uninterrupted thought is the barbell for the soul and the mind.
So a coffee shop is fine if I'm just connecting known particulars, like writing an email or designing a standard presentation.
Sure.
But to birth a universe, to pull something out of the absolute void, requires a level of sustained, extreme mental focus that is just shattered by external noise.
Right. To drive this home, Al-Waily quotes Aristotle, who famously said, "The isolated is either a god or a madman."
The isolated is either a god or a madman. That is a terrifying dichotomy.
It really is.
It implies that if you isolate yourself to this extreme degree to find the universal truth, you are walking a razor-thin tightrope. How do you know if you are touching genius or if you are just slowly losing your mind?
This is perhaps the most profound psychological insight in Al-Waily's entire thesis. He recognizes that the outward behavior of a genius and a madman look almost identical to the average person.
Because both are profoundly isolated.
Both are completely disconnected from immediate practical reality. Both are staring at walls, seeing things no one else can see.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If both the madman and the genius are totally disconnected from reality while they are alone in their rooms, and the external feedback from the public is useless because the public thinks both of them are crazy anyway, what is the actual functional litmus test to tell them apart?
The defining difference, the ultimate litmus test, is self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, Al-Waily divides isolation into two distinct categories. First, there is creative solitude, which is the realm of the genius. Second, there is what he calls tragic or delusional solitude.
which is permanent madness.
Right, akin to severe psychological disorders where hallucinations completely paralyze the rational mind.
Explain the psychology of that self-awareness in a state of deep isolation.
A madman in a state of delusional solitude does not realize he is disconnected from reality. He believes his hallucinations are the absolute, literal truth of the physical world.
And he doesn't realize that his actions appear totally illogical to others.
Right, he is trapped in a continuous waking dream with no exit.
And the genius.
A genius, no matter how deep into their creative trance they go, knows they are disconnected. They are fully aware that they have temporarily stepped out of the normal flow of reality to do a specific job.
Okay, so if a genius does something socially awkward or illogical like pouring orange juice into their cereal because they are so distracted by a mathematical proof, they recognize the mistake.
Exactly. They will snap out of it, apologize, and correct their behavior.
So the genius still has an anchor line tied to the real world, even if they've swum out into the deepest part of the ocean.
Yeah.
And the madman has just cut the line entirely.
Furthermore, the genius's isolation is always temporary. They go into the depths to find the universal truth, but then they return to reality.
They bring the idea back to apply it, to build it, and to benefit society.
Exactly. The madman's isolation is a permanent, inescapable curse. They never return to benefit anyone, not even themselves.
That is such a crucial distinction. It validates the eccentricities of the creative process, the weird hours, the intense focus, the social withdrawal, without romanticizing actual mental illness.
It's a very compassionate but highly analytical view of the human mind at its extremes.
It really is. So we've covered the heavens and the depths of the mind. Let's bring this profound philosophical framework back down to earth for you, our listener.
Let's do it.
How do we actually apply this to our daily lives? And more importantly, how should society treat these rare minds?
Well, Al-Waily concludes with some very practical wisdom regarding how we navigate ideas. He warns against two extremes. The first is blindly imitating the old just because it's traditional.
And the second?
The second is worshiping the new just because it's shiny and novel.
Ah, the novelty trap.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of downloading a massive new software update for your phone just because the interface looks modern and shiny, even if the old version actually ran faster and preserved your battery life better.
Exactly. We shouldn't toss out the old if the new isn't actually a functional upgrade.
Al-Waily says the ultimate metric we must use to judge any idea, old or new, is the most beneficial.
Right. If an old method works perfectly well, you keep it. If a new method is demonstrably better and more beneficial, you replace the old one.
And if both have unique, non-overlapping value, you keep both. It's a philosophy of absolute clear-eyed pragmatism.
It is.
But what about the people generating these ideas? How do we judge them? Because earlier we talked about how society often crushes them.
Al-Waily uses a beautiful metaphor here. He says, we must judge a person by their hope and their work, not strictly by their final results.
Ah.
He compares a genius to a seed. A seed contains the genetic blueprint, the potential to become a massive, towering tree that provides shade and fruit for generations.
But I mean, if you take that incredible seed and you plant it in highly toxic soil and you deny it water and surround it with rot, it's going to die. It will never become a tree.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, who is to blame in that scenario?
The soil, obviously.
Exactly. Al-Waily stresses that you cannot blame the seed if the soil is toxic. The failure of the genius in that environment is not a failure of their intellect. It is a failure of their environment.
So if a genius fails because they were crushed by poverty or
Mhm.
censorship or violent societal mockery,
Yeah.
society is the one that failed.
It is society's ultimate sacred duty to recognize these seeds. Society must actively clear the path of thorns for potential geniuses.
We have to provide them with the respect, the resources, and the psychological safety they need to retreat into their solitude and synthesize their universals.
Because if we don't, we are the ones who starve without their fruit.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us today? We've gone on quite a journey. We started by understanding the massive structural scale of universals versus particulars, the leap from nothingness to the first needle versus just adding a new wing to an existing house.
We explored the immense courage required to carry a new idea into a hostile world, and why the sincere attempt is rewarded even in failure.
We looked at the absolute necessity of deep inner solitude, and we mapped out that razor-thin line that separates the visionary genius from the tragic madman.
That crucial anchor of self-awareness, it's a powerful roadmap for anyone who wants to understand not just history's greatest minds, but the mechanics of creativity itself.
It really forces you to reevaluate how you treat the unconventional thinkers in your own life.
It does.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a lingering thought. It's something that isn't directly covered by Al-Waily since he was writing in a different era, but it's heavily inspired by his insistence on the absolute necessity of thinking solitude.
Okay, what is it?
Well, Al-Waily insists that deep, profound, uninterrupted isolation is the mandatory breeding ground for genius. It is the only way the mind can synthesize universals. But today, we live in a hyper-connected world.
Yeah.
You likely have a smartphone within arm's reach right now. We are constantly bombarded with notifications, emails, social media feeds, and the endless, deafening noise of the crowd. We rarely allow ourselves to be truly, uncomfortably alone with our own thoughts anymore.
That's very true.
So the question is, in our relentless pursuit of total connectivity, has we accidentally eradicated the very habitat required to produce the next great universal genius?
Oh, that is a vital question. Are we so busy reacting to the noise of the external world that we no longer have the quiet time required to look inward and build the blueprint?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the big questions, keep seeking out the quiet moments, and we will see you next time.